The wind howled like a pack of wolves as dusk crawled across the Montana sky. Snow fell hard, thick and unforgiving, erasing the trails and burying the truth beneath layers of ice. No one saw the black carriage that pulled away from the edge of the ridge that night. No one, except an old dapple-gray horse tethered to a half-collapsed barn. The horse raised its head, ears twitching. Something was wrong. Inside a small woven basket, lying beneath a pine tree weighed down by snow, was a baby girl, no more than 7 months old. Her face was pale, her cheeks red from the bitter wind. She didn't cry. She was too cold to cry. Just small breaths rising in a fragile rhythm, wrapped in a thin silk blanket more suited for a ballroom than a mountain storm. Her name was Clara. She had no idea that her own father had left her there to die. Nathaniel Grayson was a name people spat or whispered, depending on how much they owed him. He had made his fortune building railways, seizing farmland, and crushing every hand that reached for mercy. He owned 3 banks, 2 hotels, and 1 broken conscience. And 1 child he never wanted. The child had been born out of wedlock to a maid who worked at his ranch for a single summer. Her name was Mary Lou, a soft-spoken girl with amber eyes. She died during childbirth, and Nathaniel made sure no one remembered her name, not even the girls. Clara was a blemish on his legacy, a silent threat to his inheritance and reputation. So that night, with the snowstorm already brewing, he took the child, drove her to the mountains, and left her there beneath the tree, like garbage beneath a velvet curtain. But not all eyes were blind. The horse's name was Boone, a scarred old stallion with a swayback and fading eyes. Once a prized racehorse, now relegated to pulling carts of hay and barrels of whiskey for Nathaniel's ranch hands. But Boone had something most men on that ranch didn't, memory and loyalty. And something stirred in him when he saw the carriage return without the child. Something colder than the wind. He tugged at the rope until it frayed. The snow kept falling. Boone made his way through the storm, hooves sinking deep with every step, nostrils flaring as he sniffed the wind. He didn't know why he was searching, only that he must. Something had been taken from this world and left in the dark. And Boone would not let it vanish. By midnight, the storm reached its cruelest point. Trees cracked, wolves howled in the distance, and frost coated everything like a tomb. That's when Boone found her. He stood above her, steam rising from his nostrils, body trembling not from cold, but urgency. Clara's breath was faint, almost gone. The snow had nearly buried her. And then, Boone did the unthinkable. He lay down beside her. Curling his body around the infant, he shielded her from the wind, warming her with his massive frame. He didn't move for hours. And somehow, against the odds, the baby kept breathing. Morning came quietly. The storm had passed, but the damage had been done. The world was silent, except for a tiny, muffled cry from beneath a blanket of snow and horsehair. And miles away, Nathaniel Grayson sat at his desk sipping whiskey, thinking the problem had solved itself. But he didn't know. The horse had seen everything. And fate was far from done. When dawn cracked over the frozen hills, it did so slowly, cautiously, as if unsure what it might find beneath the snow. Boone didn't stir right away. His legs were stiff, his breath shallow, and patches of frost clung to his mane. But the tiny sound, a whimper, like a wounded bird, pulled his ears forward. Clara was alive. Barely. Her eyes fluttered, cheeks flushed raw from the cold. She was no longer crying, just shivering, lips tinged blue. The old horse nudged the basket with his nose, then rose with great effort, muscles creaking like old wood. And then, with a kind of ancient grace, Boone did something he hadn't done in years. He carried her. He clamped his teeth around the silk-lined handle of the basket and began to walk. 1 mile. Then 2. Past the frozen creek, past the abandoned mine where men once dug for silver and hope, and into the open meadow where a small cabin sat crooked against the hillside, its chimney coughing smoke into the morning air. Boone had been here before. Once. Long ago. Inside that cabin lived a widow named Evelyn Rose. 60 years old, with hands like bark and eyes sharp as black ice. She had buried a husband and 2 sons during the cholera winter of '72 and lived alone ever since, surviving off root vegetables, firewood, and the occasional letter from a niece back east who never visited. When Boone appeared outside her cabin, shaking, steaming, carrying what looked like a bundle of firewood, Evelyn nearly dropped her kettle. "What in God's name?" She flung the door open. Boone lowered the basket gently. And Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. A baby. Cold as the wind. Quiet as a ghost. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She swept the child into her arms, stripped away the frozen silk, and wrapped her in wool blankets soaked with warmth and rosewater. Her hands moved with purpose, no panic, only grit. She rubbed the girl's tiny feet, sang an old Irish lullaby under her breath, and placed her beside the hearth. All the while, Boone stood in the snow, watching. When Clara coughed, a weak, crackling cough, Evelyn wept. And the old horse bowed his head, as if in prayer. Evelyn didn't ask questions at first. She was used to the West's silence. Babies turned up. People disappeared. The land swallowed sins in white and dust. But she knew this wasn't an accident. Someone had left that girl to die. And whoever it was, had to be important. The silk blanket alone cost more than her cabin. So she named the girl Hope. Not out of sentiment, but prophecy. Back at the Grayson estate, Nathaniel said nothing to anyone. He told his butler that Clara had been taken in by a family out east. Paid a preacher to forge adoption papers. He even had her name erased from the county records. Problem solved. He focused instead on a new land deal, a railway expansion through the valley. He wanted more. Always more. Even if it meant raising 2 small towns to get it. The past was behind him. But Boone had a different idea. The old horse refused to return to Grayson's ranch. No matter how many hands came looking, no matter how much feed they left out, Boone stayed near the cabin. Evelyn built him a small lean-to beside her woodshed. She talked to him like he was kin. And in time, Clara, now called Hope, learned to toddle beside him. Her first word wasn't Mama. It was Boone. 3 years passed like dust through a screen door. Hope grew into a curious, bright-eyed child with a laugh that cut through the winter fog like sunlight. She loved to braid Boone's mane and whisper stories to him about stars and bears and heroes. Evelyn, though weathered, softened in her bones. For the first time in decades, she put flowers on the windowsill. She started baking again. But storms don't forget the places they've passed. And one was rolling back toward them. Hope was 5 the day she saw her first steam train. Evelyn took her to the valley to trade for salt and tobacco. That's when the noise came, a thunderous roar, like a dragon on tracks. Hope didn't cry. She just stood wide-eyed, clutching Boone's reins. It was the same railway that now sliced through the land like a scar, and Nathaniel Grayson was behind it. His empire had grown, swallowing more towns, buying more silence. He now sat on the territorial council and was rumored to be eyeing a seat in Washington. His face was clean-shaven, his boots polished, but underneath, he was the same man who'd once left a child to freeze. The child who was now alive, thriving, and within riding distance. But he didn't know that. Not yet. That evening, Boone grew restless. His ears flicked. He circled the yard, snorting at the wind. "Something's wrong," Evelyn murmured. The next morning, riders came. 3 men in brown coats, looking for squatters on rail land. One carried a folded letter with Nathaniel's seal. Another had a pistol on his hip. Evelyn didn't flinch. "Ain't no squatters here. Only a widow and a child." "She yours?" one man asked, nodding at Hope, who was hiding behind Boone. "She's God's," Evelyn said flatly. "And that's enough." The men left. But not before one of them glanced back at Hope and narrowed his eyes. Back at his estate, Nathaniel stared at a charcoal sketch delivered by courier. He gripped it tighter. The girl in the picture had Mary Lou's eyes. His eyes. Impossible, he muttered. But the seed had been planted. He ordered his men to return with more questions. Quietly. No one could ever know. Meanwhile, Evelyn began to suspect something. Hope had always been special, too special to just appear on a winter morning. She had features that didn't match the tribes, nor the miners, nor anyone in town. And the silk blanket she was wrapped in, Evelyn had hidden it, but never thrown it away. She took it out that night and saw the initials embroidered in gold thread. C.G. Clara Grayson. Boone knew. He had known all along. That same night, he left the barn and wandered into the woods. He stopped at the exact tree where Clara had been left years ago. He stood there for hours, head bowed, unmoving, as if remembering. And that's where Evelyn found him. She understood. The truth hit like thunder. Hope was Nathaniel Grayson's daughter. A child he had tried to erase. Evelyn made a choice. She would protect the girl with her last breath. She saddled Boone before sunrise and wrapped Hope in wool. Together, they rode into town to see the only man who might help, Sheriff Amos Hart. Sheriff Hart had once been Nathaniel's friend, before the money turned him cold. When he saw the child, he paled. "I know those eyes," he whispered. Evelyn placed the blanket on his desk. "Do the right thing," she said. Hart nodded slowly. "I will. But it won't be easy." 2 days later, Nathaniel Grayson himself rode into town. He didn't bother hiding his fury. "You think you can blackmail me with some orphan in a blanket?" he snarled at Hart. "She's not an orphan," Hart replied. "She's your blood. I owe that child nothing." Hart didn't flinch. "You owe her justice." But then came the twist. Boone. The old horse had been waiting outside the sheriff's office, tied loosely. But when he saw Nathaniel walk past, something in him snapped. He broke free. Charged forward. Nathaniel turned just in time to see the stallion rear back and slam his hooves into the dirt inches from his chest. And then, Boone neighed. Long, loud. Raw. Not a cry of pain. A cry of memory. The sheriff's eyes widened. "You know this horse, Nathaniel?" Silence. Boone turned his head, nostrils flaring, and looked toward the mountains. The message was clear. He had followed Nathaniel that night. He had seen. And now, he was telling the world. Nathaniel stumbled back, his arrogance cracking. Sheriff Hart arrested him that afternoon for attempted filicide. The town gasped when the news broke. Some defended him. Most didn't. But one truth was now undeniable. The horse had seen everything. The courthouse in Billings had never seen so many people. Ranchers, widows, miners, even schoolchildren stood shoulder to shoulder as the trial began. Snow dusted their hats and boots, but no one left. They had come for justice, or at least, a truth too long buried. Nathaniel Grayson stood tall behind the defendant's bench, jaw tight, suit immaculate. But something in his eyes had changed. Not fear, no, men like him never showed fear, but something close. Fragility. Exposure. And sitting across from him, holding a small hand in hers, was Evelyn Rose. Beside her, wearing a little blue dress and boots too big for her feet, was Hope. Calm. Watching. Boone waited outside. Sheriff Hart testified first. He spoke of the silk blanket, the initials, the forged records. Then came Evelyn, steady as a mountain, recounting the night Boone had brought the baby to her doorstep, how the girl had barely clung to life. But it was Boone's testimony, silent, unspoken, that sealed the court's heart. Because the judge, old and half-blind, asked only one thing. "Can you prove this man meant to leave that child for dead?" Sheriff Hart turned to Boone. He untied the silk ribbon from the blanket, the same ribbon that had been on the basket's handle, and held it in his hand. Boone's ears perked. And then, slowly, the old stallion walked forward. Not to Evelyn. Not to Hope. But to Nathaniel. And he stopped, just 3 feet away, and lowered his head, pointing it like an arrow to the man's chest. The room went quiet. Nathaniel froze. The message was clear. He knew him. He remembered. And he had seen what he did. The judge leaned back. A horse has no voice, but truth don't always need words, he said. The gavel dropped. Guilty. Nathaniel Grayson was sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison for attempted murder and falsifying state records. His estate was seized and sold to fund a local orphanage. His rail projects collapsed within the year. Men forgot his name. But not the horse. Hope stayed with Evelyn. She kept the name Hope, not out of hiding, but choice. She said the name reminded her she had 2 mothers, one who gave her life, and one who gave her the chance to live it. She grew strong. Smart. Fierce. She never hated her father. But she never spoke his name again. As for Boone, he grew slower. His mane turned white, his eyes cloudy, but he remained ever close. Hope would read to him every night by the barn, stories about stars and justice and why the wind sounds sad sometimes. On the day he lay down and didn't rise, the whole town came to say goodbye. They buried him beneath the tree where he had found her that night in the snow. A carved wooden sign stood above the grave. He saw. He remembered. He saved. Epilogue: The Lesson in the Storm. Years later, Hope became a teacher in a small schoolhouse near the mountain pass. She told stories to her students, not just of kings and castles, but of horses and choices. She taught them that family isn't just blood. It's who shows up in the storm. She taught them that animals can hold truth deeper than words. And she taught them this. Justice sometimes rides in silence. But it always arrives. Life lesson from the story. Never underestimate the silent witnesses in life, the ones who see what others ignore. Truth may be buried under snow, hidden by power, or silenced by fear, but it finds a way to rise. Sometimes, through a voice. Sometimes, through courage. And sometimes, through the eyes of a horse.